the Courageous Self-Care podcast. I'm your host, Christina Marlette. On this show, we talk about self-care that goes beyond bubble baths, chocolate, and wine. It is self-care that goes deep, it goes wide, and the benefit of doing those scary things is that it's transformational. It truly changes your life. It helps you become more of who you truly are and who you desire to be. And for so long, I lived in stressful chaos of perfectionism and trying to prove myself to everyone. And I feel like I'm so far on the other end of the continuum of that, where I still like to be productive, but at the same time, I can usually, most often, be peaceful at the same time. And I feel like the difference of what is in the middle is courageous self-care. So often we need a guide to learn how to practice this courageous self-care because it's very strategic, it has actionable steps, it's a skill set. And so that's why I'm here. And today I have another guide with me, another self-care expert and guru, Deb Crowe. Deb, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Christina.
Oh, my pleasure. It's always fun to talk about someone whose interests are totally aligned with mine. So, Deb, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to.
Well, I'm currently a professional life coach and executive coach, and I'm also a professional speaker, and I'm on a mission this year to take my self-care talk across Canada.
Lovely. So how did you get into this, Deb?
Well, about 7 years ago, I had a medical case management practice. And what that means is I would look after men and women, adults and children, who would sustain a head injury or a spinal cord injury. So really catastrophic injury. And it's a very stressful environment to be in. It's a space of animosity, if you will. And I just got tired of giving and giving and giving as hard as I tried to have boundaries and look after myself. Unfortunately, with lawyers and insurance companies, I just landed up on empty. There was nothing left in the tank. And I decided to get on the other side of the curve and help people who were on short-term disability claims deal with their stress. Because I thought the catastrophic injury, I gave 23 years of my life. But I thought, what if I went to the other side of the coin and helped men and women who were off work because of stress? And that's when I started talking about work-life balance. And then I really didn't like the word balance because I really think it holds a negative connotation. And I know with your teaching background, I think you and I, again, lock arms and align with that value. So I love to use the word integration and not feeling that everything has to be perfect, like you said, and done. And we have good intentions for the day, but coming from the world of loss and trauma and dealing with so many families across Canada, our intentions can be good, but sometimes life happens. And that's when we just have to let go of that and really implement some really good, strong, compensatory self-care strategies.
That's so powerful. I'm covered in goosebumps, which I call truth bumps. So that's a good sign. And yeah, I can totally identify with not aligning or resonating with the word balance. You use integration. I love to use the word harmony. And I did some research into both words and their origins and their definitions and the energies of each word. And the reason I don't like to talk about work-life balance is because, like you said, balance has a negative connotation, and it's another way that we can set ourselves up to be really hard on ourselves. Like, oh no, I spent all day working. I must be a terrible mom. I'm out of balance. Like it's one or the other. And if you think of a scale, if you even put the tiniest feather on one side of a sensitive scale, it's going to go out of balance. And that's why I love to use harmony. It's more like a jazz improvisation piece where the trumpet gets a solo, but everyone else is still supporting in the background. And then the drums take a solo. And so that's like when you are at home and you're focusing on maybe cleaning or something, everything else can still be going and supporting in the background. It's not like you've ignored it and you've failed. It's just that you are focusing your energy on one thing at that time, and then you can come back and then you can all play together, and it just feels so much nicer.
Yeah, I like your interpretation of that as well, because to me, whether it's harmony or integration, it's just really a self-audit, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. And we can all stand, I think, for the most part, to be a lot more gentle on ourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So, Deb, what I love to do first with guests on the show is to have you share your current favorite self-care practice. And I say current because as a recovering perfectionist, I had the list of things that I thought were self-care, and then all of a sudden they didn't seem to be serving me anymore. I didn't want to do them. I needed a break from the rigor of what I had set up for myself. And so what I learned is that we can be malleable with our self-care. And as long as we're doing something that we define as self-care, where we feel good before or during or after, then it counts. And so what is your current favorite self-care practice?
My current self-care practice has been probably in play for about 7 years. It's pretty stringent, and I can honestly tell you that I do not waver from it. I have a solid morning routine. Mm-hmm. So I get up at 5, and I've been part of that 5 a.m. club, like I said, since 2011. And the beauty of it is that's my time. It's my space. My home is quiet, and it gives me that opportunity to exercise. I have a gym in my home. I also like going to the gym, but I have the flexibility of what I feel serves me in the morning. So lately, with the chilly weather here in Ontario, I've been working out in my home gym. So I exercise, and then I have a gratitude journal that I've been using for about 3 years. And I do a 10 to 15, sometimes 20-minute meditation in my gratitude journal. And then I spend about another 20, 30 minutes just really crafting out my day. And again, I don't put a lot of weights on the points that I put down for the day when I'm crafting, because I try and stay in that alpha brainwave that you get when you're meditating, because that's when I get my inspired ideas and I really stay focused on what I do for the day. So in that last 20 or so minutes, I craft out the day, and I have 3 main things that I want to get done in that day, with the hopes that they'll get done, and with no emotion if they don't get done. And I just have affirmations that I also practice in the morning, and then I have a different one at lunch and a different one at dinner time, end of day. And I find if I stay with those 2 strategies for myself, it just allows me to be solid. I don't know what other word to use. Mm-hmm. And whatever is thrown at me during the day, I'm really able to handle it. And what I love about this conversation is these self-care strategies, if they're put into play and they're repetitious and they're solid and they're welcoming, you know that it takes at least 66 days to instill the habit and adapt it to the lifestyle. But it just allows you to not react to anything. I call it ebbing and flowing with my clients and when I'm teaching. And it's okay if something doesn't get done, because life is and will always happen for us.
Right. I love that. And I love that you made a decision initially to join that 5 a.m. club. So I want to know what your life was like before you made that decision, and what made you decide that you wanted to become a member of that club and give that time to yourself.
Well, I was burnt out from being a case manager. The last 2 years of my practice, all I did was testify in court. Mm-hmm. And I was yearning and missing my direct patient contact, which was the love of why I went to school and made that a career and started my own business when I was 24. But I lost the love because unfortunately I got intertwined in that world of animosity of lawyers and insurance, and I didn't have the fight left in me anymore for my clients, and everything was coming down to money. So I really had to sit back and think, people are injured, but there's that low hanging cloud over my head that everything had to be fiduciary with this world. And I thought, it's time for a change. So I actually went on a mastermind retreat with my business coach. I went to Italy and Paris for 2 weeks. and I just rested and recharged and rejuvenated. And when I came back, I thought, I'm missing getting up early in the morning, because I had used to do that quite frequently, like Monday to Friday. But when I was appearing so much in court, I was just avalanched in paperwork, and there was no separation between my personal life and my professional life. And that's when I drew the line in the sand, and I thought, it's time to develop an exit strategy and change my business and transition to something different. So I just looked at all of my skills, and I thought, I really have been working with injured individuals and people who have a diagnosis or an illness. And it just seemed like a natural migration for me to transition into this world and use the skills. And it certainly didn't hinder me with all my medical knowledge and education. And it just seemed like a win-win.
Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, are there days when it's hard to get up at 5, and especially when you were first starting out? And if so, what do you say to yourself, or how do you get yourself out of bed? Because I know a lot of people are hearing this and I'm like, well, I can't do all that stuff. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I don't have time for that. So what were your strategies around that? Or was it just easy for you because you're an early bird?
Oh no, fully transparent moment. There are absolute days where I do not want to crawl out from underneath that warm duvet. But you know what? It's mindset. It's those self-affirmations. It's that talk. And I like to call it the fire in my belly. I love to help people, and I really want to be authentic and transparent. So I'm so happy you asked me this question, because I get asked it. Is there ever, a morning you don't want to get up, and do you never not get up? I rarely not get up. I might snooze and do 5-10, but the voice that goes off in my head is, this is your time. This is for you. You're tired right now, but you know how you're going to feel in an hour. And then that's usually okay, I'm going to get up now. But sometimes I'm no different than anybody else. I'm no different than you. I will hit that snooze button, because we cannot lead with perfection, because it's non-existent. I can lead with self-auditing and progression. And that's how I go easy on myself, much like I'm sure you do. And, for all the moms out there, we just do what we can do in the day, and tomorrow's a new day. And some days we do fall into bed. So those are the nights where I think, 5's going to come really early, but I always know in an hour how great I feel. And that's my push.
Right. Yeah. And once you have, I think initially when we're starting something, even when we're starting to move our body on any given day, that our body's like, no. And then it's the first 3 to 5 minutes are really uncomfortable, but then you get into a rhythm. And so I think developing a habit that's not just that movement, but over a span of days and weeks and months, the initial part can be super uncomfortable. But that's why I talk about courage, because courage is simply moving through that discomfort and finding out that what's on the other side was so much better than you anticipated. Just like you said, I know I'm going to feel fantastic in an hour. And something that has worked for me and for my kids, we do proud ofs at the end of the day. So I ask them why they're proud of themselves. So it's not all about me being proud of them, and they have this inner drive. And then I also tell them why I'm proud of them. And for me, I do that as well. I think about 5 things at the end of the day that I did really well or that I'm proud of. And they can help me form my decisions earlier in the day. Am I going to feel proud of myself for this, for lying in bed in the morning when I knew I wanted to get up? No, I want to feel fantastic about myself at the end of the day. So that is a tool that I use.
And I like that. And I like that we model for our children in this regard. And I think it's important for our children to see that we're just a little bit older than them. We're just a little bit farther down the road of life, and we make mistakes. We have bumps in the road, and sometimes we want to be lazy, and that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that also is another form of self-care, is listening to what we truly need. So if there's a given day where it does not serve us to get up early and have that time, that's okay too. But on the other side, when you do have these routines and take care of yourself and have these rituals, I find that I rarely do need to sleep in because I'm very healthy and my immunity has gone through the roof with the practice that I have. So I don't often need to lie in bed like I used to.
Oh, 100%. And you can tell if you are honoring self-care, because when you take care of the inside, the outside glows. And I have many conversations with women who struggle in all kinds of different elements in their life. And, they can have the paleo diet, they can eat vegan, they can take their vitamins, but I always say to them, unless you're ready to turn inward and really have that self-care, you might as well throw your dollar bills into the fire, because taking something, inside your mouth to think it's going to solve the holistic whole body difficulty on an emotional level, there's just no synergy there.
Exactly. And yeah, that's the main message I want to get across to people is you can spend your energy focusing on nutrition and hydration and sleep and exercise. But if you're not doing any work on the inside, it's not going to do what you want it to do. You won't have the energy that you think you were promised by pursuing those activities. And I know from firsthand experience, I tried for years to fix my very poor body image by eating healthy and by exercising, but it didn't work because I needed to go deeper inside and face those really nasty voices that were constantly in my head and make some changes. And that took a lot of courage. So that is super important about the kind of self-care that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And just being very mindful and cognizant to your habits of thinking.
Right. Yeah. Most of our thoughts, if we haven't been mindful of them and we haven't trained our brains how to think, most of them are negative. That's just how we're wired. But the great news is that we can rewire our brains and we can transform our synapses that are programmed for negative thoughts into positive thoughts, which is fantastic news. You just have to do the work.
Absolutely. I love that. I'm a neuroscience junkie, so that gets like a big hurrah from me.
Yeah. Hip, hip, hooray for neuroplasticity. We're going to pause here for a moment for a brief message from our sponsors, and we will be right back. Welcome back. We are going to continue on with the interview. So, Deb, I'd love to move into the second portion of the interview, which is where I get guests on the show to share their story of courage. And just before you do that, the reason why I like to hear stories of courage and also spread them is that, as Brené Brown says, courage is contagious. And when we hear other people's stories of courage, it gives us the permission to say to ourselves, hey, I did that. Maybe I'm courageous too. Because a lot of women I meet think that they are not courageous, which is completely not the truth. We all partake in small acts of courage every day and sometimes really big acts too. But, and so that's one reason. So we can identify and notice, oh, I do give myself permission to call myself courageous. And when we think we're courageous, we act more courageously. And then also when we hear other people's stories, if we haven't had that experience, we can borrow that courage and say, well, if she did it, then maybe I could do that too. And I could even use the strategy that she said, or I could do it this way, but I'm going through the same thing. So I know that there can be something on the other side of this difficult time. So having said that, I would love to hear one of your stories of courage.
I think the biggest story of courage for me has been the last 5.5 years. I just closed my medical case management practice and looked after many people with brain injuries. And then we were coming home from our boat and our daughter was ahead of us about 20 minutes in her own car. And her right front tire blew. And she hit the gravel and overcorrected, and she rolled her car twice down into a ditch. So I went from being a case manager to people with brain injuries to now having a daughter with a brain injury. So the courage really came was that I had to put boundaries in place of knowing when I was her mom and when I needed to step in and play case manager and not let those two worlds collide. And the bigger factor for that was being a caregiver is really, really exhausting. And I've done a lot of education with caregivers over the years, and self-care is the foundation that you must have as a caregiver. I mean, we all need to have it as women, but when you're caregiving, you need a little bit extra TLC because you're exuding so much emotional and physical energy. And a lot of times women just go and do, and they're on, and they'll go and go and go until they just collapse. And I just didn't want to go to that space again. And I knew how harder it was because it was my own daughter now. So it was a much different space, and really trying to, again, draw that line in the sand. And when I needed to be her mom, I was her mom. When I needed to handle the logistics, for which I was so grateful that I knew the system and I had the knowledge, but it's different when it's your own child. So for me, modeling self-care, not giving up my morning routine, and literally mornings falling out of bed where I had nothing, but I knew in that hour to myself I would feel better. And it's interesting because we fast forward to now, and she's in school, and that's one of the things she always says to me is, I'm going to do my self-care today, and you know, Mom, you never let things get to you, and if something doesn't work out, you just get back up. So modeling that behavior and being courageous to do so, because not everyone's going to like that you do that, because not everybody has a positive set, but that's okay, because I only have to worry about me, and I don't have to worry about what other people think, and I don't strive to be perfect or exude that I'm living this life of perfection, because I'm no different than any other woman, you know, on this planet. And if something doesn't go right, I'm okay with it. I just keep moving on. I always say to my kids, be like Nemo, keep swimming.
Yes, it's a great role model.
Because we only have one life. And I always say to people, you know, we're all in the line to go up there one day. We just don't know where our place is in the line. So, you know, for me, another strategy that really helped me when I was home with my daughter, and her name's Christine, by the way, is I, in the middle of when her rehab was heavy and I thought I was losing myself, another self-care element that I did was I went and volunteered at hospice because my soul needed that. It was I call it a metacognitive reset, and I still go every Tuesday morning to this day. And I think sometimes if we just stop in the worst of times or when we've had a bad day to just really look around, and I ask people to just look up and say thank you. We're very grateful, and we have a lot, especially in this beautiful country we live in. And even though you think it's the worst day of your life and you know, this has happened to you, there's always somebody worse off. And so when I'm with those people at end of life, I leave there and I walk out the door, and it's just like this big weight's gone. And it's like, thank you. I needed this today because I have this beautiful life that I've created, and I'm not at the end of life, but I'm happy and honored and privileged to be with people who are, because they teach me so much.
Oh, I'm sure. So Deb, you said something very important and powerful, and that is that as mothers, and if you're a mother listening to this, you'll hopefully really resonate with it. And if not, then other young people in your life, it's so valuable to set the example of who we want them to be. So when mothers in particular are giving and giving and giving and always doing stuff for their kids and doing stuff for their career and doing stuff for their community, and they have nothing left, I want them to think, if they turned it around, is that what they want for their kids? What they're modeling for their kids, is that how they want their kids to grow up and behave in the world? And I think more often than not, if not 100% of the time, hopefully the answer is no. And so how are they going to learn? The only way that they can learn is by other people setting the example. And a mom is a great person to set that example. So when I first started off with my kids, I had no self-care practices. I didn't really know about it. It wasn't a concept that was familiar to me. And I was one of those moms who just gave and gave and gave. And when I started learning and going to decades worth of personal development, I realized how important what I teach my kids is, whether it's through what I'm saying or especially how I'm acting. And so I started saying to them, I'm going to these courses so that I can come back and be a better mom to you and a better wife to my husband and be exactly who I am rather than having this facade. And so it's just so important to reflect on the example we are setting for our kids. And of course, we want them to grow up to be people who take wonderful care of themselves so that they can give fully too.
Oh, I fully agree. And I think the hardest careers that struggle with this are our nurses, our social workers, our first responders, because people don't have an appreciation for the shift work that they do and the heightened level of hypervigilance that they work for us. So they can't just come home. So that's a population that I strive to help on a regular basis because they're helping others and they're go for their whole shift from 8 to 24 hours that they work. Yeah. So I think that's just such an important point to drive home.
Yeah, absolutely. And with your background, you have a window into what most of us don't understand, like that shift work and that what we're doing when we're always giving, it's like we're constantly exhaling. And if we never pause to inhale for ourselves, well, we just die. That's the bottom line. You can't always exhale. You do need to inhale consciously and purposefully and with the intention that you're inhaling to give to yourself for two reasons. One, so that you can continue to give to others from a place of fullness. And two, because you just deserve to inhale. You deserve to give to yourself. And who is it? It says, if you're breathing, you're deserving. So you don't have to wonder, do I deserve this? Am I good enough? Byron Katie. Yeah, she says, if you're breathing, you're deserving. So just knock that question out of your mind if you're wondering.
No, I love that. And I'm also a newly last summer yoga teacher. And you're right. That's such a great metaphor. And sometimes the easiest thing to do when you're not having a good day or you've had a rough day is to just pause and breathe. Mm-hmm. Takes nothing but your time.
Right. And it's always accessible. Even in the toughest situation you're going through, even in emotional pain or physical pain, taking that breath is something that is always accessible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for sharing that story. And I know people are resonating with you and wondering more about what you do. So how can they get in touch with you if they want to access you? Because you work with people online, right?
I do. So My website is Deb Crowe, and Crowe has an E on the end. It just means I'm Irish. That's all that E is for, .com. And I'm happy that we chatted today because it just shows that there's two other women who have locked arms and are sending the same message. And you do it in a beautiful way with your teaching background and all that you've done. And we just have to keep sharing our message. So really grateful to share and be on your podcast today.
Thank you, Deb. And I know you have a conference coming up here in Calgary. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
I do. So I started my Women's Self-Care Conference in Ontario in October, and we are bringing it to Calgary on Saturday, February the 9th. And we're graciously being hosted by Smart Technologies in their beautiful new building. And I have a surprise for you, actually. I didn't know if you knew, but there's a woman by the name of Susan Ellsford, and she has been appointed the chapter leader, if you want to call it, for Lean in Calgary. And they're going to do their main launch in April. And they're taking off from Lean in Toronto and Lean in Vancouver. So we've done a special code. It's Lean in Calgary. And if anybody's listening, they can get $100 discount.
Wow.
from the support of Lean in Calgary, and Susan is going to be there to do her soft launch at the self-care conference. So we're pretty excited about that we're able to help her and get your chapter in Calgary off the ground.
Wonderful. Well, that's very generous. Thank you. And can people get tickets on your website? Is that how they do it?
They can, yes.
Okay, great. So if you are near Calgary or in Calgary and you are feeling the need or the call or the tension or the pull to spend a day learning about self-care, like I find that most women, when I talk about self-care, they're just, oh, it's just this vague idea and I got a pedicure, so I'm good. That's not the kind of self-care we're talking about. The kind we're talking about, it needs education, it needs guidance and mentors and a community. And so I encourage you to check out Deb's conference, to join. And it's so powerful when a community of like-minded women come together to learn and to expand who they are and to find out and grow more deeply into who they are meant to be. So I encourage you to partake in that special offer that's being generously shared with us. And Deb, thank you so much for that and for taking the time to be on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And we'll end by saying self-care is not selfish. How's that?
That's right. I say that on the end of almost every podcast I do on my own. I just have to remind you that self-care is not selfish. It is an act of courage, and it's also an act of generosity, because when you take care of yourself first, then you can give more fully with love rather than bitterness and resentment and emptiness. No one wants to receive that kind of gift, right? We want gifts that are imbued with love. So yeah, nothing selfish about self-care. Deb, thanks again.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening wherever you are in the world. I'm so grateful that you took the time to listen. That is an act of courageous self-care as well. If you are feeling any kind of butterflies or any bubbles or anything around wanting to share your story of courage on the show, please be courageous and do apply to be a guest. You can find that on my website, which is ChristinaMarlette.com. The links for both of our websites are in the description of the podcast. And I love that you were here. You can give yourself a big pat on the back, and I'm sending you lots of bonus super secret gold stars. And I look forward to connecting with you again next time. Bye-bye for now.